Civil rights are guarantees that the federal government will treat people equally and that decisions will be based on merit rather than race, gender, religion, or other personal characteristics. Sometimes civil rights are called positive rights because they are powers and privileges granted to the people by the Constitution. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, found the Supreme Court a particularly powerful tool for advancing civil rights in the 1950s and in the 1960s. In one of the most famous landmark cases of the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, 1 and 2, 1954 and the following year, 1955 respectively, it overturned the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson case that had upheld segregation by allowing for separate but equal accommodations on sleeping cars. This landmark case helped set the course for civil rights victories in the 1950s and 60s. The liberal Warren Court, named after Chief Justice Earl Warren, handed down many landmark decisions on individual rights in the 1960s. In Engle versus Vitale from 1962, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bible reading in public schools was unconstitutional on the grounds that it was a religious activity that placed an indirect coercive pressure upon religious minorities. This is an example of the protection of minority rights discussed in Module 5.5. The Warren Court first forced states to draw their legislative districts with roughly equal populations inside them in two landmark decisions, Baker versus Carr in 1962 and Reynolds versus Sims in 1964. The two decisions enshrined the one person, one vote rule in American constitutional law. Recently, in April 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously turned back a legal effort to reinterpret the one person, one vote ruling that states may rely on total population when drawing their legislative districts. The 2016 case Evanwall versus Abbott was brought by two Texas voters who argued that counting non-voters, children, the mentally disabled, disenfranchised prisoners, and non-citizens broke that rule and diluted the political power in violation of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Many observers noted that in Evanwall's interpretation, it would redraw the American political map in favor of whiter, older, and more conservative people. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote for the majority, rejecting the appellate's case. The Warren Court also handed down some important rulings that protected American civil liberties. Civil liberties can be defined as freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution. Sometimes they are called negative rights because in these areas they curtail the power of government. In the 1965 Supreme Court case Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court protected Americans' right to privacy by striking down a Connecticut law banning the sale of contraceptives. This right to privacy could be found in the First Amendment, which grants the right of association, also in the Fifth Amendment, which protects against self-incrimination. You've heard the statement, I plead the Fifth because my answer tends to incriminate me, right? And the Ninth Amendment, which states that an individual's rights are not limited to those explicitly stated in the Constitution. Another important Supreme Court case involving the right to privacy is Bowers versus Hardwick. In 1986, the court ruled that a person did not have a right to engage in homosexual acts which were illegal in Texas. But then the Supreme Court overruled its earlier decision in the 2003 case Lawrence versus Texas, stating that consenting adult homosexuals did have a right to privacy. In the recent June 2015 Supreme Court case Obergefell versus Hodges, the Supreme Court overturned state bans and made same-sex marriage legal throughout the United States. The Griswold versus Connecticut case, however, would influence the debate over reproductive rights, and in particular, one of the most controversial Supreme Court cases in history, Roe v. Wade. In 1973, in a 7-2 opinion, the Supreme Court sided with the plaintiff, Roe, stating that the right to privacy included the right to abortion. The court, trying to balance the concepts of rights to life and privacy, came up with what was called a trimester framework. In the first trimester, a woman could seek an abortion. In the last 2 trimesters, however, the court argued that the state had an interest in regulating abortions, if they were based on health reasons. The state must have a compelling reason, the ruling stated, for regulating these. Thus, the Roe ruling nullified state laws that made first trimester abortions illegal. And from that point forward, the courts would grapple with a whole host of related issues, like spousal consent, for example. And the cases in the 1970s, such as Doe v. Bolton and Planned Parenthood versus Danforth, were some of these cases. In 2003, President George W. Bush signed the Partial Birth Abortion Act. And the Supreme Court upheld this act in Gonzalez versus Carhart and Gonzalez versus Planned Parenthood Federation of America. The Partial Birth Abortion Act prohibited a certain abortion procedure, which had previously been allowed if a woman's health was at stake. Critics of the Warren Court protested its judicial activism, which means the attempts by a judge to influence public policy through their case decisions. These critics preferred judicial restraint, meaning they wished to see the Supreme Court decide only narrow constitutional issues and not usurp what they believed to be the powers of other branches of government. Sometimes, however, the Supreme Court may restrict civil liberties. Japanese internment is one such example. On March 21st, 1942, during World War II, under the auspices of national security, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, and this authorized the sending of all Americans of Japanese descent to makeshift prison camps, euphemistically called relocation centers, located in remote areas of the West, like the Arizona desert. 2.5 years later, in December 1944, the government declared the emergency over and allowed Japanese residents to return to their homes. In the Supreme Court case Korematsu versus the U.S., the court declared that the evacuation was constitutional. Federal government restrictions on civil liberties often come during a time of war, and national security is often cited as the reasoning. This is true during the War on Terror. In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, Congress passed the Patriot Act. And the goal of the act was to catch terrorists before they could strike. A 300-page of legislation, it expanded the government's abilities to put Americans under surveillance and to monitor internet and phone communications. The law allowed the federal government to find out what books people checked out from the library and what videos individuals were watching. This was previously allowed, but only with a court order. While some thought it was a sign that Big Brother was here, as mentioned in Module 2.1, others felt that they had nothing to hide. The law was reapproved with minor changes in 2006. I suggest you carefully go over your textbook and continue to read and review this video and answer all of the questions.